Hi, everyone. My name is Ian Lake.
Hi, I'm Daniel Santiago.
And I'm Ben Weiss.
And we're here to talk about a little thing called navigation. Now, what is navigation? If you're here for Google Maps, you're not in the right talk, because today we'll be talking specifically about the Jetpack navigation component. Now, when we say component, what does that actually mean? Well, let's look at what the mission statement for Jetpack navigation actually is. So it's a suite of libraries, tooling, and guidance that provide a robust navigation framework for in-app navigation. So a very specific goal is kind of that in-app navigation, that navigation between screens, and provide more than just the libraries, but also tooling and guidance to go along with that. So I think it's best to kind of explain navigation with a sample app. So here we're going to build a trivia app, and because I'm a Googler, it of course has chat built in. So we have a chat list that has all of your conversations, and then of course a chat fragment, which will actually have the actual conversation itself. And of course a profile, and all these will be available via a navigation drawer on our main activity. So we chose fragments here because they provide a really good integration with other architecture components like view models and lifecycle. And to kind of actually make this all work, we're putting all of these fragments in a nav host fragment. So this is the thing that navigation provides for you, which is basically the container where as we swap between these different screens in our app, the nav host fragment is what's actually going to be that container in your layout. So what do we actually need to build out this sample app? And it's a 40-minute talk, so we're going to go fast. But we have a navigation graph itself. So this is kind of the map of your app. And it has 4 fragment destinations, our 4 screens. Then, of course, we're going to have a menu. And that'll be for setting up our side navigation, our navigation view, with what items we want in that list. Then, of course, we have our layout for our activity, which is going to have a drawer layout for our side nav, a toolbar for our top app bar, and then our nav host fragment, which is actually going to be the main content of our app. And then lastly, we just need an activity to kind of tie all those things together. So what does this actually look like? First, we'll start with the graph. Now, we want a deep integration in the tooling. So in Android Studio 3.4 and 3.5, we have a navigation editor. So besides being able to do things in XML and also programmatically, if you're up for that, you also get a visual editor where we can actually see the structure of our whole app here, with all the pieces and all the links between each one. So for example, between the chat list and the chat. Next, for our menu, it's all very kind of basic stuff, IDs, icons, and titles for each one. But the important part here is we'll use the same IDs as we put in our navigation graph. And this is what will let navigation kind of tie these things together automatically. Now, of course, for our actual layout, we've stripped out a few layout widths and heights, so don't try and compile this, but it has all the important bits. Specifically has one important bit, which is the actual nav host fragment itself. So here we'll just put it directly in our layout, nav host fragment, and here's where we'll actually use that app nav graph to tie that to the graph that we created in our XML. Then to hook up our navigation view for that side nav, we'll just attach the same menu that we built here. So now what we really need is just the activity that binds all these things together. So we made it really easy from anywhere in your activity, as well as anywhere in a fragment, as well as any view within that whole hierarchy to get an instance of your nav controller. So call an extension for find nav controller with just the ID of your nav host fragment. Of course, if you're using the Java programming language, then you'll be able to use a static method to do the exact same thing. So once we have this nav controller, right, this thing that is powering all of navigation, what do we actually do with it? Well, we can do a couple things. One, we can set up our toolbar at the top. And what we'll do here is use the app bar configuration. This is kind of that figuring out what that top app bar is supposed to do in the first place. And the first thing we want to do is make sure that all of those top-level destinations, those 3 things in our navigation view, are all kind of at the same visual hierarchy. So we pass in the list here, and those are the ones that won't show an up arrow, right? They're all at the same visual hierarchy level. So we want to make sure we tell navigation, oh, these 3 destinations are important. Then we're going to pass in the actual drawer layout itself, and this is the key that says when you're on one of those top-level destinations, instead of showing no icon at all, we want to show that hamburger icon so that users know that they can pull out the drawer. And then, with that app bar configuration set up, all we call is setup with nav controller, another Kotlin extension on the toolbar here. And now, as we navigate between screens of our app, we're automatically updating the title in the toolbar. We're automatically changing the icon, and there's nothing else we need to do to hook up to get the correct up behavior, to get the correct label. It's all kind of built into this functionality because we've set up our app bar configuration correctly. Similarly, for our navigation view, it's the same type of thing. We have just another setup with nav controller. And now, whenever you click on something in your side nav, it's automatically going to go to the right screen because we use that same ID in the menu and in the navigation graph. Similarly, the selected item is always going to stay in sync with where you're at in the graph. So now we don't need to focus on anything else, but we built a lot of things, right? Like we never need to touch our activity again, but how do we actually put this all together? Well, it started with the common library, and this is where we actually have the runtime equivalent of navigation graphs and all of the kind of base components. And on top of that is the actual navigation runtime library. So this is kind of that thing that provides the actual nav controller itself. But on top of that, we realized, like, OK, well, that's kind of the core pieces, but we wanted to build a few things. So a lot of people do use fragments. They are probably one of the most popular APIs, not from a popularity, but from a usage perspective. So we wanted something out of the box, and especially that integration with other architecture components was really important. So we have the nav host fragment and the ability to use fragment destinations in a navigation fragment library. Similarly, if you're using those material components like toolbars and other things, then we have a navigation UI, which is what provides the app bar configuration and all these setup with nav controller items. These top 2 items are totally optional. If you want to go off the rails and do something totally different, we do support all of that as well, just using navigation runtime. And of course, because it's 2019, of course, we have KTX versions of all of these. So Kotlin extensions for all of these things, as well as a Kotlin DSL for building navigation graphs, and many other features if you're using Kotlin. Now, we talked a little bit about the library side and saw the navigation header, but we also have more tooling integration as well. So being able to integrate in with manifest merger, so you don't have to write intent filters for deep links. We can build that for you out of the deep links you put in your navigation graph. Similarly, we also have a safe Args Gradle plugin, which we'll talk about more in detail, that really makes it easy to move between destinations in a type-safe way. And of course, we also talked about the guidance side of things. So one of the things that was really important for us is to not just throw a library over the wall, but instead really talk to our internal design teams and other teams outside of Google, say what actually works for developers. How can we make a consistent experience across everyone? And that really came up with a lot of the guidance and a lot of the documentation that we provide. So we have quite a few pages on developer.android.com that really go into the details on how, not only how to use navigation, but also some of the why and some of the reasonings behind things, and the way to really kind of set it up in a consistent way across every app. And also, we have worked with DevRel and other organizations to make sure that you have good getting started points with our code lab. Now, the documentation was a really big focus for the navigation stable release last month. But it also is a big focus for our Navigation 2.1 release, which is in alpha right now. One of the things in there was dialog destinations. So in addition to using full screen fragments, now you can use a dialog destination, and then you can navigate to a dialog. So this is supported out of the box by nav-host fragment, just like fragment destinations. And allows you to use all the same actions and arguments as you would for any other kind of destination. So what does this look like in code? Well, instead of just using the fragment tag for a fragment, now we can use a dialog tag for a dialog. That's pretty easy, right? Same type of things are supported. So if you have arguments, like for example here, we have an error message for our error dialog fragment. Those all still work, just like any other destination. Another feature that we were really excited about for Navigation 2.1 was integration with view models. Now, view models are an architecture component about saving data across configuration changes. And with the new safe state view models, even saving things across process death and recreation. But we realized there was something that needed to happen in between the activity scope, i.e. the entire app, as well as just the individual fragment level. So now you can actually scope things to a navigation graph. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Here's our 4 destinations that we had. And now we want to add an onboarding flow, right? And so our onboarding flow is welcome, setup, and find friends. Because, of course, we got to connect to all of our friends with a totally incompatible proprietary API. But for these things, we want to share data between these fragments. So by encapsulating this in an onboarding graph, a nested graph, now we actually have the way of attaching information at the graph level rather than just at the destination level. So what does this look like? Well, we can just use a by nav view models Kotlin property delegate to actually get an instance of our onboarding view model from any one of the destinations within that graph. Now, of course, there's a static method for Java users as well, so it totally works on both. And then we can do whatever we want. So in this case, when we setup is complete, we save the user ID into our view model. That allows, say, our next fragment to then get an instance of that exact same view model, even if you've done configuration changes across things, and then extract that information out of it, or maybe do something more useful, because this is a toy example for slides. Now, these are all kind of based on a lot of what we built for our Navigation Stables release. And one of the things I was most excited for was safe Args. And to talk more about safe Args, here's Danny.
Thanks, Ian. All right, so like Ian mentioned, SafeArg is a Gradle plugin that basically complements the navigation library. It basically grabs your navigation file, analyzes them, and generates some code for you to use in your application to help you safely pass arguments and navigate to valid destinations. Now, you might be wondering, why did we create a SafeArgs? Or why would you even use SafeArgs? After all, it's an optional plugin, but we highly recommend that you use it. The main reason is that some of the checks that are performed at runtime now get to be done at compile time. So this means you get to do faster iteration as you work with your navigation graph. Now, because it generates code, it means it can leverage some of the existing tools. In Android Studio, for example, autocomplete will kick in when you're trying to use it. And again, because it generates code, it means it transforms your types in your navigation arguments to actual types in the language system. Let's take a look at it and how to use it and the kind of code it generates. We're back to the chat application. We got a new requirement. Our bosses, as usual, give us more work. This time, when we click on a thumbnail on one of the chat lists, we get to go to a profile. So now we have 2 destinations that we can get from our chat list. If we take a look at how we have defined our chat list destination, as usual, you define the fragment that it uses, and the 2 arrows that come out of it are the 2 actions that we have, and these are the two destinations that you would use to get out of it. Now, we are on our chat list fragment. We're trying to hook things together. We're implementing our profile image, click listener. We have an app controller. And usually, you would navigate using your action. This is how you would do a normal navigation, usually, without safe args. But with safe args, instead, you would use the generated code. You would use this class called chat list fragment directions. We'll see it in a bit. But the cool thing here is, as you're trying to use it, the IDE kicks in, and you actually have autocomplete on the valid actions that you can take from this destination. Now, what does SafeArg actually generate? Well, for each destination, it'll generate a directions class. And this class basically has functions for the valid actions that you can take. These functions also actually have parameters. And these parameters are based on the arguments that you have in your action. And if they have default values, they will show it here as default value, as you can see. And this is how we make sure that by calling this function and passing the right parameters, you will be able to receive them on the other side correctly. SafeArg also generates a second set of classes, which we call the Args classes. We navigated now to the profile fragment, and we want to parse the arguments. We would use what we call the profile fragment Args, a generated class by the SafeArgs. And this is just a data class that contains your actual types of your arguments. But as you can see, it has these two methods, toBundle from bundle. And you would use these methods to actually get the args out. But using this method is how we basically take the responsibility from you from using bundles. Even better, if you're using Kotlin, we also have this extension, lazy function, by navargs, which helps you get those args and start accessing that data pretty quickly. Now, you might have noticed that the generated code is in Kotlin, and that's because SafeArgs will actually generate both Java and Kotlin code. And some people were pretty excited about it. They stopped pressing the shift button, and yeah. Now, to use the plugin, you just go to your build.gradle, apply the plugin with the ID. Using this ID will generate the Java code, but using the Kotlin version of the ID will generate the Kotlin code. Pretty straightforward. Now, why did we decide to generate Kotlin? Well, there's two main benefits. One is build performance. If you have a Kotlin-only app, then generate the Kotlin code. That means you don't have big sources. And the second is that we get to use automatic Kotlin code. In the Java version of the generated code, we have builders. But in the Kotlin version, we have data classes with primary constructor that you can use name arguments and default arguments. So that's pretty nice. Because they're data classes, you also have things like copy, hash code, and those kind of things for your arguments. Now, whether the plugin generates Kotlin or Java code, it doesn't mean a lot if we don't support a lot of types. So we started supporting the primitive type, and as we got closer to stable, we were able to add support for parsable, serializable, and enum. So if you have actions that have arguments that are parsable and enums, you can use those. With the new documentation, we actually have a pretty table with all of this information. You can look up there how the syntax looks, whether it supports default values or not, nullable, and things like that. SafeArgs is pretty good when you're trying to work with a tightly coupled graph, but sometimes you might need to have a more deep coupled navigation graph, and Ben here will talk to you a little bit more about that.
Thank you. Modularizing applications has become increasingly important, especially since we last year announced the Android app bundle. And this year, with dynamic feature modules being generally available, we will see a lot more applications that will be modularized. This not only reflects to your application while you develop it, but that allows you, with dynamic feature modules, to actually ship parts of your application to your users. A couple of the benefits around modularization during development are that you can cut down your build times by creating distinct modules. Also, you can separate the concerns within those. Separation of concerns also is around navigation. A navigation library supports modularization. So let's talk a little bit about how you can split up your graph while you break up your application into distinct modules. We saw this graph grow over this presentation, and we have a couple of, if you look at the design editor here, we have a home and error, home graph, which also has the error dialog. We have a chat list, we have the chat, and we have the profile as well. Also, we have a nested graph in here. We can break this up in multiple ways. What we are doing here is we're breaking up this graph into several distinct libraries. We will still continue to have one application module. We will have a home module, a chat, and a profile. We'll just take that away and put it into a distinct graph in a distinct library module as well. So if you take a look at this navigation file, it's really, really tricky to see what's going on here. And this is already a very simplified example. If you have a real-world app, you can keep on scrolling with these for a long time. So what we do instead is we just break it up into the modules. We take out the relevant destinations and put those into the files where they're going to be used. And we do that for each of the modules that we are creating. As you can see, each of that has a start destination that we're able to jump into. And then we include these in the graph that we are hosting in the application itself. So all the modules that we have created can be included in that. The way this works is using the include tag that has been around since we launched navigation. And you just simply include the graphs that we have extracted out here. This goes alongside each other navigation destination that already exists, so you can have nested graphs or any other target, any other destination in here. This is really cool when you have independent graphs and you want to navigate between those. That's great. But what if you want to move from one graph to another? Our chat app has grown. So we have a profile fragment, but also, well, we want to have friends in the app, so we want to make sure that we have the friend list there as well. And since you can navigate from the profile to the friend list, we have that in the profile graph. So what you want to do is, or what you can do here with IDs, is you can simply reference the chat graph and the start destination here. But that will only lead us so far. Actually, what we would like to have is we want to go straight, if we click on the friend list, what we want to do is we want to go straight to the chat fragment and being able to chat directly with the friend, rather than going to the chat list first and then jumping in there. With IDs, like I said, it's not only possible to jump directly to the start destination of the graph. And that's why with Navigation 2.1, we have enabled navigation by URIs. So you can use deep links to navigate directly to destinations, even across graph boundaries. How this works is you remove your ID and declare a deep link in here with a URI that can host the parameter for a user ID, so you can jump directly into the user fragment and can start chatting with your friends straight away. So you no longer have to hold on to IDs. You no longer, in a modularized app, would have to have them in a shared space. Instead of that, you have your URIs that you can share across the application. And within the friend list fragment, what we then would do is we simply build up the URI and navigate to our destination. Another problem that we came across is when you navigate not within an app that has library modules, but one that has dynamic feature modules. The question around here is, where are we going with this? Libraries can, so as you can see, the dynamic feature modules have a bit of a different way that the dependencies are on one another. So they can depend on the app, and it's really tricky to navigate between those features when it comes to modules that are not on device in particular. Dynamic feature modules can be installed initially or can be downloaded later on. We've heard questions around this over the past year, and we thought about it, and we have started to work on a new library that is extending the navigation library that will allow you to intercept navigating to separate destinations. Then, if the module that we're looking for is not installed, it will take care of all the downloading for that. provides you with a couple of callbacks to either provide your own UI while it's downloading, or with a default safe version for you to use as well. And then once the module is downloaded and ready, it will continue navigating. If the module is installed initially, all what it does is it directs you directly to your target destination. We just looked in a bit of the future what's in store for navigation. And to talk a little bit more about the bigger picture here, let me invite back Ian.
Thanks, Ben. I'm really excited about the dynamic feature navigation and looking forward to seeing that later this year. But I wanted to talk a little bit more generally about just where we're going with navigation. So I realized it took us a while to get to that 1.0 stable release. But from now on, what we're trying to move towards is a much faster iteration time. So the time between the first alpha and the first release to beta, to RC, to stable, we realized that not everyone is happy using the latest alpha release. And sometimes a little bit of that stability, or at least the word stable or the lack of the word alpha, can really help win over PMs who aren't as familiar with what alpha means for navigation. So we're really trying to focus on just a small set of features. So what we talked about today were the core of the features in navigation 2.1. At this point, we're saying, like, no, let's cut it off here, and let's go towards beta and RC and stable now, rather than continuing to add features over and over again. But that doesn't mean that we're not working on more things. There's certainly a lot more. The dynamic feature navigator is one thing, but we're also really looking at your feedback. So we have and we use the issuetracker.google.com extensively, particularly for navigation. And all these counts here are actually the number of stars that you all have given for navigation features. And we can see we've done pretty good. We fixed a fair few of them. Some of these are actually fixed in navigation 2.1 based on your feedback. But there's still a few more to do. And if it's not in 2.1, it's going to be in 2.2 or 2.3 as we go through things. We realize some of these things, like multiple backstacks, are very highly requested. And they do mean that we also need to work on the underlying libraries. So for example, that one, we should probably get that working in fragments and then working in navigation as well. And that's certainly bigger efforts, but it's something that we're dedicated to do and something that we think that will be great to have out to all of you in the near future. So I'd really like to continue. If you have more feature requests, bug reports, anything, please let us know. If we can find an issue for it already, we'll certainly be happy to look at that. But your stars really do drive the future of navigation.